I like waking up to the smell of bacon. Sue me. And since I don't have a butler, I have to do it myself.
Hello, everybody. My name is the Osinator, and welcome back to the channel. And I just want to have one question for all you guys tonight. Are you ready for war? Because we're talking WCW Fall Brawl 1995 War Games. Yes, we're talking a WCW pay-per-view, but I'm not alone in this endeavor because I got my co-host Shifty in the house. What's up, Shifty?
What's up? What's up?
Now, nothing much, man. How's it going?
Well, you know, I'm not Mr. Wonderful. I'm not Mr. Wonderful.
No one can be Mr. Wonderful.
No. Well, only Mr. Wonderful can be Mr. Wonderful, but I'm not Mr. Wonderful.
There's only one Mr. Wonderful, but it can't be any of us.
Yes.
Yes. This is actually our first pay-per-view review of this series we're going on here in season 1. I kind of like to call the years themselves like a season because we're just going to divvy them up here. So this is the first of 4 pay-per-views we're going to be reviewing in this season, as we're also going to be reviewing Halloween Havoc, World War III, and Starrcade. And this is the first pay-per-view actually to be in the timeline of the Monday Night Wars, as Nitro just started 2 weeks beforehand. And
yeah, that's kind of felt odd because they didn't really. If you started watching with Nitro, there wasn't really a good build up to this pay-per-view.
No,
they should have scheduled things because a little bit better than that because it felt odd because a lot of the matches that were on the card they didn't even talk about on Nitro.
No, they did not.
It's really weird, and I wish they had started Nitro the year before because War Games 1994 was the only pay-per-view to be held in my hometown, and I wish we could be reviewing that right now, but we're not. That's okay though.
So, because I was thinking like after we talk about like the Monday Night Wars stuff, when we might end up coming back and just reviewing some of the other older WCW shows.
Oh, that would be great because WCW was so good like during like the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, because you kind of see how different WCW is from like 95 going into 96. Yeah. And then like once you see like mid 96 where they bring in the Outsiders, like WCW really changed. But I also want to see like what the hell like was going on during like the 80s, 90s, like WCW before this, because WCW is a very interesting topic, like as a company, because you have a company that had so much promise go into the dumps because of just so much bullshit, which we're going to talk about throughout like the series, but it's bizarre.
They couldn't find a really solid leader. I mean, Bischoff was okay there for a while, but after Crockett sold the company to Turner, they couldn't find really good management there for a while until finally Bischoff took over, and then of course they went into Monday Night Wars and beat WWF for a while, and then they started to slip, and we know what happened after that.
Yep, and then the company died, and it hasn't been talked about again, except when WWE decides to bring it back up again.
Yep, or 2K decides to slap some Legends characters in their game.
Pretty much. So, it's time to talk WCW Fall Brawl 95 War Games. That's how William Regal tends to say it. This show was in North Carolina, Horseman Country. You're going to hear that a couple times during the show.
Boy, that arena looks small.
Very small, but apparently the buy rates for this show was 95,000, not people in the crowd, but 95,000 pay-per-view buys.
Yeah.
Your commentary team for the evening was Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan. The first time we've seen Tony Schiavone in the series, as in the last couple episodes, it's been Eric Bischoff, Steve McMichael, and Bobby Heenan. But now we're kind of getting like the traditional two-man group for the pay-per-views. And I have to say, I mean, for a commentary duo, you could do a lot worse.
Yeah, but I don't know. I actually went down the rabbit hole of watching some shoot interviews with Bobby and Shivani this afternoon, and they had a bit of a falling out. Bobby did not like Tony for a while, and it's kind of interesting to go back and find out where they had a breakdown in the relationship and stuff. But yeah, Bobby, I read up on his career in WCW after he left WWE. He wanted to do a lot more than announcing. He wanted to like get into the creative aspect and help them like do segments and stuff and shape the characters. But they said, you're just an announcer, that's all you're going to do. And it was just a money roll for him, and you could tell he looked kind of bored when they had shots of him sitting there with Tony. And Tony, man, I like him, but sometimes the lines that they would force on him would be super annoying. Like, how many times during this pay-per-view did he remind us that WCW is the #1 wrestling promotion in all the world?
Quite a lot.
Yeah, it's like every 5 minutes he would bring that up, and I know that they needed to do that to get a foothold on WWF in the ratings war, but man, God, it's just annoying.
It does get annoying after a while because like I even like noticed this in one of the matches where like you even have Shivani even trying to like shell out like nitros on Monday, like you need to watch it, which makes sense because it's a new show that they're doing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like you got to commentate the matches here,
And even like during some really bad matches, he'd be like, "These are the great superstars you'll see in the #1 promotion in all the world here in WCW." And it's like, what, Craig Pitbull Pittman versus Cobra? And I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, we'll talk about that one because that was like a. But I will say before we begin too, I've always really liked the 2-ring like kind of thing that they do for War Games, because then you can like, although they didn't really use the 2 rings when it came to the normal matches, but I really like the setup for that.
Well, they did in the tag match.
Yeah, they did, but that was really the only real time they really used it.
Colonel Parker was getting him some sugar.
Oh God, we'll talk about that too, because we're going to talk about everything WCW Fall Brawl 95 War Games.
First, we need to mention that half the damn show was on the main event pre-show. It was like 5 matches. We didn't get to see it.
Now, granted, I don't think we would have missed much, but at the same time,
well,
it could have.
Outside of Alex Wright versus Eddie Guerrero, that sounds like it might have been a good match.
It might have been, because you had 2 guys like Eddie Guerrero and Alex Wright, who were like Alex Wright, like we talked about last time we did this, was a very underrated talent. Like,
yeah,
somebody who, again, maybe should not in the main event scene, but somebody who could have been upper mid card guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was only 20 years old.
Yeah, I mean, there could have been time for him to really like grow and maybe be a main eventer, but knowing in hindsight, I don't think he would have gotten far because of the backstage stuff.
Well, that and because, after he got there, they brought in all the luchadors and stuff, so he kind of lost his place. And they tried to reboot him as what was his new gimmick
called? Think it was Berlin, I think. Yeah,
Berlin, and he had the Wall come out with him. Yeah, that didn't go over too well.
No, it did not.
We'll get there eventually.
Oh yeah, we definitely will. But before we continue, I want to let everybody know this is episode 2 of season 1. If you haven't seen our last review of the first 2 weeks of Nitro, what are you doing? Go check that out. You know, maybe do it after the show because really you're not missing much in terms of the build. So
No, there was no bill for half of these matches.
oh yeah, like and even during like the opening, like the cold open of the show, where they're kind of like doing the intro of like, oh, it's WCW Fall Brawl, here are the matches, and then they're really only focusing on the 2 main event matches, which again makes sense because again, people are paying to see the Wargames match and Arn versus Flair, so I get that they don't want to spend too much time on them, but at the same time, like not a lot of build, like you said, and a lot of the build probably happened during Saturday night and main event and worldwide, which again, Peacock doesn't
Yeah,
have most of that, so that kind of sucks.
yeah, but then again, you know, did it really want to build up Craig Pittman versus Cobra?
Well, apparently they did, but the match was just so we'll talk about it when we talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, but before you also continue, I also want to bring up the Bobby Heenan thing. Like even during Nitros, it just sounds like he's kind of phoning it in and just almost doesn't want to be there.
Yeah, yeah. He didn't have the spark he had in WWF. It's just I don't know. Like I said, he didn't particularly care for Shivani, and the idiots that came later during later years of Nitro, he probably liked those guys even less. I'm sure he got along with Zabisco though. I mean,
Oh
Zabisco
yeah,
seems all right.
oh yeah, definitely. I think he would have. So yeah, let's get into the show. So of course, you know, Shivani and Bobby are kind of just hyping up the show. You know, Bobby Heenan's torn apart about Arn Anderson. He's torn apart. He's torn apart over Arn Anderson, Ric Flair. They're advertising the War Games match. So a lot of like standard stuff at the beginning of the show. The opening match, however, was a U.S. title. They call it a U.S. title, like eliminator match, but I'll just say winner gets a U.S. title shot against Sting. Flying Brian took on Johnny B. Bad. So last time we saw Flying Brian, he was actually in the first match of Nitro. Had a
Yep.
pretty good match with Jushin Thunder Liger, and this is the first time we're seeing Johnny B. Bad here. Johnny B. Bad got a very nice pop from the
Yeah. Yeah.
crowd.
Yeah. This was towards the end of his WCW run because in '96 he headed over to WWF, joining his then wife, Rena Marrow, also known as Sable, where he became Marvelous Mark Marrow. And I think I don't exactly know where this storyline is going to go, but I mean we'll talk about it here after you run down the match because this might be his final program here. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll talk about this a little bit after because what's really ironic here is both Flying Brian and Johnny B. Bad, aka Mark Merrill, would basically be gone from WCW in like beginning of '96, around beginning of '96. So it's kind of ironic that literally the winner is going to face Sting, but then the two guys.
Yeah, but the storyline supposedly was Sting trained Johnny B. Bad, and because he wins, or I don't want to spoil it before you run it down, that he's going to get a shot against his mentor or whatever. And I don't know if that was their way of like ending his run in the company, but we'll have to find out.
Yeah, well, we're gonna go through the match, and then I'm gonna go through the match. Then we're gonna just talk about it just as a general match. So, in my notes here, I did also bring up that Michael Buffer does the introductions for both the main event and the first match.
You gotta wonder. You gotta wonder if he was actually a wrestling fan because I'm sure he was paid well enough to where he became a wrestling fan, but they got him for some really low rent pay-per-views. But of course, when you bring in Hogan and stuff, they want to make it seem like a big time deal. But it just seems like with him being on all these like big time boxing events that he wouldn't do like a little rinky dink hole in the wall pay per view from Asheville or North Carolina.
Yeah, that is something because like he's there for quite a bit too. Like,
Oh yeah, during the main event, he's like doing the rules and like doing he's like the timekeeper of the match, and he's like the next opponent is going to be in about 30 seconds. And he did a pretty good job during the main event.
yeah, he was very good. And also fun thing too, Michael Buffer, you know, when he was doing Flying Brian's introduction, like he brings up the Hollywood Blondes, and even the commentary team brings up Hollywood Blondes, which that's
Yep.
kind of interesting too, because you would think because, you know, Steve Austin's not there anymore, they would kind of not necessarily pull it under the rug, but not really mention it. But
When did he leave?
I believe Austin was fired in, ironically, 95.
Okay, like the summer or
Because I know it was early on in 95, but I'll check.
okay. Well, we don't have to do it now. You got it in the ballpark.
Hold on. I believe he was fired June of 95.
Ah, okay. So it's been quite a while.
It's been a few months, so it's very,
Yeah.
very surprising, especially after they just fired him pretty much. So
Uh-huh.
So to run down the match real quick, lots of back and forth technical wrestling. There's points during the match where they try a drop kick, but then they both hit it, but they miss. There was like a very awkward spot in the beginning where like it looked like they were both looking for like an arm drag or something, but Johnny B. Bad ends up selling it and Brian doesn't. It's kind of weird, but I was like, okay. A lot of counters and pinning attempts in the early going. Pillman ends up hitting the first head scissors, and like he ends up doing a victory roll, which looked really cool. A lot of really cool pin combinations here. Johnny B. Bad ends up getting cut at some point, in the early going. Like you could tell, like he's kind of bleeding a little bit. So there, and I'm gonna bring this up too. There's a lot of rest holds in this match.
Oh yes. I was gonna. Yeah, that's the killer for me. I mean, there was a lot of great spots, high flying spots, but I haven't really went back and watched a lot of like old wrestling outside of clips, and they know what to edit out of the old matches, and that's a lot of reverse chokeholds and headlocks, but the storyline of the match, you got to look at it this way. They needed to keep the loser, who we'll reveal here in a little bit. They needed to keep him look strong for what was coming up after the match and after the pay-per-view in the coming months, because a certain group's going to be reforming. They needed to keep him looking strong, so they needed to have the match go the distance. So you had to have the wear down moves and the rest holds to pad the match out, because it goes to overtime. Like I said, to keep the loser looking strong. And both of them, even though it was slow at times, it got the two wrestlers where they needed to be at the end of the day. But when it kicked into high gears and they were doing the high spots, it was great. And I actually saw Mark Marrow retweet the match yesterday. I don't know what was the anniversary, yesterday or the day before, and he said how much he loved wrestling Flying Brian at War Games in '95.
Yeah, and I could see why, because they do a lot of stuff in this match that's really cool, which I'll bring up here in my notes. But I mean, the one thing I'll give them both, like especially Flying Brian and Johnny B. Bad, they had really good chemistry. Like, they just nailed it out of the park. Flying Brian ends up like counting a headlock with like a back suplex backbreaker, which I thought that looked really cool.
Yeah.
He then locks at a Boston Crab, which of course Johnny Bad gets out of it, and then there's some striking, and Johnny Bad ends up coming back with a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker, which I always like a good tilt-a-whirl backbreaker. We also see a surfboard variation from Johnny Bad. Pillman ends up cheating throughout the match because the crowd was just booing Brian throughout the match. Like Johnny Bad was too popular to the point where Flying Brian was getting booed.
Yeah.
it wasn't like too bad in the sense of like it was like nuclear heat, but it was like kind of just like we kind of just prefer the other guy type of boo.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
well, he had such an over the top gimmick, Johnny B. Bad. I mean, the kids and stuff that they just gravitated towards him.
yeah. Then they trade strikes, and then Johnny B. Bad ends up hitting a springboard leg drop, which again looked really cool. They end up trading leapfrogs, which they smash into each other. I have a lot of notes for this match. Like I did my homework for this. Fly Brian ends up hitting a headbutt, which I thought, oh shit, that was brutal. Johnny Bad ends up hitting a suplex off the apron out of the floor. Then he dives on the Flying Brian, which then he goes up to the top, and then Flying Brian counters it with a drop kick. Sit out power bomb from B Bad. Then Flying Brian hits a tombstone. There's a lot of counters from major moves, like Johnny B. Bad counters the tornado DDT. Then Flying Brian does like a Russian leg sweep. Johnny B. Bad hits a face buster and then tries to go for the Tutti Frutti, but Flying Brian ends up like putting his knees up. Or no, he ends up hitting the Tutti Frutti, which is like where he like sucker punches him. And then Flying Brian gets his leg on the rope. Then like towards like the last 30 seconds, because this was supposed to be like I think it was like 20 minutes, I believe, like a 20-minute time limit.
20 minutes, yeah.
Fly Brian hits like a springboard clothesline for a 2 and tries to like roll him up, but like it just ends. But then the match goes into overtime, which then they both like punch each other, and then they go to the outside where Johnny B. Bad goes into the barricade. And then they attempt drop kicks again, but this time Brian's was on from the top rope, which I thought was a very cool visual. Flying Brian ends up getting locked into a sleeper hold, and then but then he ends up, I think Brian covers it with like a belly to back suplex. A lot of counters towards the end here where Johnny B. Bad counters a superplex into like a very massive victory roll for like a 2, at which then Brian ends up countering powerbomb with a Hurricane Rana for a 2. A lot of counters here. Johnny B. Bad counters a crucifix for a 2. Then Johnny B. Bad hits the bad day for a 2, which then Flying Brian hits a tornado DDT for a 2. And then Brian gets crushed off the top rope, then gets thrown off the top rope into the barricade. Johnny B. Bad ends up hitting the bad mood and then tries to hit it again, but Brian gets his knees up. Flying Brian ends up draping Johnny over the top rope, then hits a dive to the outside. Flying Brian goes for a triangle drop kick, but gets crotched. And then the end of the match is they both hit a crossbody, and Johnny B. Bad ends up getting the pin, which means that Johnny B. Bad gets the U.S. title shot.
Yeah, that finish, I don't know. That I didn't care for the finish.
I mean,
it was weird. I've never seen anything like that, but
to be fair, it couldn't be worse than if the Shark landed on him and Johnny B. Bad pinned him.
That's true. And oh boy, I can't wait to talk about the Shark later on.
Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about Wargames. This is a match where it is a good match, but, and then this is where I'm gonna put the but here. Yeah, the problem with this match is it's really long.
Yeah. They booked it. I mean, they should have at least made it 15-minute time limit instead of 20.
Yeah.
It's not that it's too long. It's that there's too many rest holes.
Yeah.
But the rest holes because it's too long. It's just, I don't know. But like I said, they had to do that to make Pillman look strong for what's coming up.
Yeah. And plus, they were, I think they were trying to stretch for time too, which.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the problem though. They, like we talked about before, they had 5 matches on the pre-show. They could have stuck something else on the card. Like this match coming up next, boy, that should have been on the pre-show instead of Eddie Guerrero and Alex Wright or the Nasty Boys versus American Males.
Yeah, because we're going to talk about the next match real soon, and I got nothing to say, but I have a lot to say because literally I did not take notes. I basically took like 3 notes for the match because literally that's all it was. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, don't get me wrong. They did use their time wisely. I just felt like they could have shaved off a few minutes, and it might have been it would have been better if it was a bit shorter.
Yeah.
because what I'm reading here, the match went almost 30 minutes, which
Yeah,
it
that's
felt
too
like
long.
it went very long. But for what it's worth, it was good. It was very good.
It was all right.
So
Yeah.
if you want to know the fallout of this, so Johnny B. Bad ends up getting the U.S. title match against Sting, but he does not show up because somebody slashed his tires on his car because he didn't make it to the building. Someone slashed his tires. Who slashed his tires? We don't know yet because it hasn't happened yet, but we'll talk about that, later on because somebody did it.
What show was that supposed to be on the title match? Nitro?
I believe it was Saturday night.
Oh, so we're not going to be able to cover it. Okay.
No.
Whatever.
So that's why we're basically going to cover it here because we're not going to cover it.
All right.
So after the match, Johnny Bat's celebrating, and then they cut to Mean Gene, who's interviewing the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, on his match with Arn Anderson later on. Ric Flair having the butterfly robe. Honestly, his butterfly robe is probably one of his best robes that he wears to the ring. It complements like the black robe, like the silver butterflies. It just looks nice. So basically, he's cutting a promo about his match, and he just cuts the same promo from Nitro, but this time Lex Luger doesn't come out, and like Ric Flair's putting over Lex Luger, like he's actually cutting a promo about, like, again, how the Four Horsemen symbol doesn't represent the Four Horsemen, but really represents Ric Flair and Arn Anderson's friendship, and how they've been up and down the road together, and how it's a big match, and how they're gonna beat each other up, and how they're gonna wrestle in Horseman country, and how they're the masters of war games, and how at the end they're gonna talk about with their sons about who's the king of the hill. Again, even though we kind of saw it on Nitro, this was the better version of it. It was simple, straight to the point, but it works. Like it hypes up their match a lot more than what happened on Nitro. So, any thoughts on that, Shifty, before we get to our second match?
Not really. I'm just preparing myself for the travesty that was Pittman versus Cobra.
Yeah, let's talk about this because
first of all, okay, Pittman is the bad guy, and he's the military guy. He's up against a good guy, but his name is Cobra. The bad guy's name is supposed to be Cobra, not the good. I mean, didn't they watch G.I. Joe, or did WWE you can't recreate G.I. Joe because we have Sergeant Slaughter? It made no sense. The bad guy is supposed to be named Cobra, unless he's Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, that was very weird. Also, like, Cobra's theme music is literally just a fucking like just a sound effect going off, and there's like a couple kids like pumping their fists in the air. I'm like, what? Okay, that's okay. Sure, we'll do that. Basically, I'm literally going to describe the match word for word here because literally this is all this is all it was, and I want everybody to listen closely here. So a guy comes out and he distracts Cobra. Meanwhile, Pittman's rappelling from the rafters, Crow Sting style, and proceeds to choke Cobra out with his belt, before the bell rings, which then he throws Cobra to the outside and like he tries to like jump on him, but I don't know what he was going for because it looked like he landed on his Cobra's leg. And then so he jumps on him, and then like he gets thrown into the ring post. Cobra goes for a top rope move, takes a face buster. Then Pittman locks in the Code Red armbar for the submission victory. That was the match.
A good day for the core that the match was over.
Like, what was the point of that?
I don't know. I don't know. I guess they were running low on time after the first match. It's just poor time management all the way through that pay-per-view. I don't know.
Like, to me, it's like, I didn't understand like what was the purpose of the match, because they were talking about how it was a grudge match, but like we don't know the build up for it. Like,
Yeah, because it was on Saturday night or probably like the weekend shows. I mean, they didn't need, they needed a rundown of the matches on Nitro, but of course Nitro was only an hour back then, so they couldn't really do that. They didn't have enough time. Maybe that's probably what main event was for. They had the rundown of all the matches on the card, and we didn't get to see it.
Yeah, this was just this was just bizarre. Like, not even it's not good. I ended up I gave this match a D as an overall grade, because it's like there wasn't anything to grade. Like,
That's
it was
too high.
You may be right, but I'm being generous because, again, it only went 1 minute. They, at least you could tell they were trying to do something with the time they had, but nothing clicked. So maybe I'm being too generous here, but it was just
Yeah.
Which I gave the first match. It's of the first match, by the way, is around an A- to like a B+. I think if it was shorter, I think it would have been really, really good. But that's kind of where I'm just keeping it.
And then the next segment, oh boy.
I'll let you talk about the Shifty. What was the next segment of this show?
Oh boy, we cut to Mr. Wonderful in his dressing room, and he's pacing back and forth, and he's like, "Man, I'm not Mr. Wonderful. I'm not Mr. Wonderful." And he looks up all at his face in the mirror. He stares at his face, and he's like, "Man, I'm just not Mr. Wonderful. I'm not Mr. Wonderful." Then all of a sudden, Gary Spivey of the Psychic Friends Network, in case you don't know who this guy is, he looks like a half man, half poodle psychic guy. He sticks his head in the room and he's like, "Hey, Paul." And he's like, "Gary Spivey of the Psychic Friends Network?" He goes, "Yes. I just wanted to remind you that the people think you're Mr. Wonderful, so you're Mr. Wonderful." And then Paul's like, I'm Mr. Wonderful. I'm Mr. Wonderful. That's right. I'm Mr. Wonderful. And then the segment ends. That's what it was. It was one of the worst things I've ever seen in professional wrestling in all my life.
It was a very bizarre segment, but it was the funniest segment I've ever watched.
I don't know if they were trying to lampoon Stuart Smalley from Saturday Night Live. I don't know if you know that character where he goes, "I'm good enough, smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me," because he kind of brought sports stars onto SNL where they would sit next to him on the couch and they would stare in the mirror and they would be down, on themselves and thinking that people didn't like them, and then he would cheer them up. I think this was kind of a play on that. But boy, they did not do it right. It was bad. It was bad, and I mean they couldn't even afford a good psychic. They should have brought like Miss Cleo or somebody on this. I mean, I don't think anybody even remembers who this guy is. This dude, you need to look him up. Gary Spivey of the Psychic Friends Network. Dude, he looks like Lamb Chop, man. The puppet Lamb Chop.
Yeah.
God, crazy, bad segment, bad. This is like a White Castle of Fear, bad almost, even worse. This is terrible.
Very, very terrible. I would say it was just entertainingly bad, but it was just very weird to like put this on the show. But
that's too much work.
Speaking of interesting, next up we have the WCW World Television Championship matchup. Renegade, the defending champion with Jimmy Hart, takes on Diamond Dallas Page before he became a big star, and he comes out with Max Muscle and the Diamond Doll.
Which was his old lady.
It was, yes. And it is kind of interesting to see where DDP is here. Compared to where he ends up becoming, because he had a very different look, very different persona. He came out with like a cigar in his mouth, like he was kind of wearing like more or less like a not like a bodysuit, but like he was wearing like some sort. It kind of reminded me of like Undertaker's ministry gear
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
vibe.
He really had a like an almost WWF style persona there,
Yeah,
and he actually had tried out for a announcer or a commentator job a few years before in WWF and didn't get the job. I think it was around the same time Bischoff tried. Didn't get the job. Didn't get to work there, but and he started late wrestling. I mean, well, he was always a wrestling fan and managing up through the '80s and stuff, supposedly. But he wasn't until he was like his late 30s or early 40s to where he actually started wrestling and getting pushed in WCW. And I got to say, I really like this match just because I grew up with WWF style wrestling, and his persona really fit the type of characters I grew up with, and way over the top, but super entertaining. I think he might have stole the show in some regards, just on the undercard. Really liked him. Diamond Doll, what's her face? What's her name? Like
I
Kimberly.
believe
Look,
Kimberly. Yeah.
looked great. Looked like Shania Twain coming out there. Looked awesome. Just great personality, and all he needed was to get a little bit more serious when the NWO came in, and he skyrocketed. I mean, you could tell that he was going to be a superstar from this match, and he took off when the NWO came around.
Oh, absolutely. But first, I want to talk. What's up, Kavari? Good to see you. Yeah, DDP, and this match in particular. I'm gonna talk about here because I broke it down, but there's definitely some stuff to talk about with this matchup here. But yeah, DDP really like even like before he fully became like this main event talent, like he had it, but
Yeah,
he needed that extra push, which ended up getting in with the NWO to really make him into a household name, which he deservedly so. And for a guy who started really late in his career, like or late in his I think like you said, like he was in his late 30s, early 40s, like he had it. Like
yeah. I mean, he was man. It was like 1979. He was into wrestling. He started. He got Bam Bam Bigelow into the business. If you saw the behind what is that show, Dark Side of the Ring, that aired just a couple months ago. They were friends in New Jersey. He had a bar, and he helped start his career. So he was all up into the wrestling all through the '80s. He just didn't get that push and to get his career going until he was late and it reminds me just a little bit of a certain superstar in WWE right now by the name of LA Knight, who has been all around but never really taken off until now in his 40s. So who knows if that guy's going to see the same success as DDP.
we'll see. But speaking of DDP, we're going to talk about the World TV title match. So, right at the beginning, before the bell rings, DDP ends up attacking Renegade, and he ends up hitting Russian's leg sweep. And he does like a really smooth like transition into the pin, which looked really nice.
Yeah.
Then he, of course, Renegade kicks out, and then he no-sells it. DDP tries to headbutt Renegade, and then once he headbutts him, he begins to oversell like crazy. He headbutts him, he stumbles, goes out of the ring, he's dazed.
That was great. It reminded me of Shawn Michaels in that Hogan match that he had at
God, that SummerSlam match. That is, it did remind me of that. And the fact that DDP then turned into the ring post, hit his head on the ring post, and then fell into the barricade. And Tony Schiavone throughout the match just does not like DDP. He's like, hey, a fan painting sit there. I was like, all right, that was pretty funny. So DDP, he falls he goes outside the barricade, he falls in. Then Renegade headbutts DDP, and then he brings back into the ring. They throw each other's heads into the top turnbuckle. Renegade did something really cool here. Like he puts him like on the top rope with where he had a headlock in, but he ends up like throwing him down, which I thought that looked kind of cool. Then he hits him with a clothesline. Renegade would miss a shoulder block, but then DP would kind of hot shot his head and like hit a swinging neck breaker. Eventually, they start trading pinfall attempts before taking Renegade down with a clothesline. DDP would try for a shoulder block in the corner, like he did one in the corner before, but he did another one, but then he misses. Renegade does the comeback where he does 2 clotheslines that he did like this really back elbow, but I think he did like a cartwheel flip, which I thought that was like, oh, that was pretty cool. And then he like followed it up with like a top rope axe handle. And then Renegade tries to go for a hip toss. And then DDP does this really nice counter with like into a DDT. I was like, oh, that's awesome. And then he tries to go for the diamond cutter, but then Renegade he rolls him up, but he kicks out. Renegade ends up throwing DDP into Max Muscle with an Irish whip, and then hits a power slam, which then Max Muscle then gets upset with Jimmy Hart about that. So Renegade ends up going to the top rope, but then clotheslines Max Muscle. Renegade tries to go back into the ring, but the refs distract with Jimmy Hart. Max Muscle ends up grabbing his foot, and then DDP hits the diamond cutter for the 3 and wins the television title. Which also, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Throughout the match, DDP would have Kimberly, aka the Diamond Doll, like hold up like a 10 sign, like, "Hey, that was perfect." Like that was pretty cool. I would say this match for what it was solid.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was a fun match. It wasn't too long where it was overbearing, but it had enough time to where it told a basic story. Yeah, it was a basic match, but you had a couple.
It was exactly what you needed after the previous match.
Yeah, it wasn't anything spectacular. It was just palatable. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Renegade last episode, I think, is the guy. I know, like, people like, it's just like, yes, the gimmick was shit. Like, let's just be real. The gimmick was shit. But the guy, you could tell he was agile for the big muscular guy. You could tell he could at least somewhat go. It's like, it kind of sucks what happens to him later on, but the guy had promise.
They were just so desperate to recreate the Warrior, and, they stuck him with a crappy gimmick.
Yeah, and that's the sucky part. It's just I wish they did more with. I again kind of going back to the Alex Wright guy. I don't think he would have been a main event guy. But I would have liked him to maybe stayed in the upper mid card and maybe give him something different to make him look like a legitimate character, if that makes sense. Because with this gimmick, even if they kept it going, there was only so far I could really do with him.
Yeah.
Because what were really the plans with him after this? Were they gonna have him feud with Hogan? Were they not gonna do anything? It's it's just one of those unfortunate things in wrestling. But as far as the match goes, I give it a C+.
Oh, I'd give it a B+. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Because I look at it as this: the match itself wasn't anything special, but for what it was fine. And a C+ isn't necessarily a bad grade for me, because C+ is a match that did the job well. It wasn't mediocre. C is where it starts to be mediocre, but C+, B- is more it's competently done. Yeah. And for what it is, it works.
Yeah.
Which there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Which then, of course, afterwards they're hyping up the tag title match between Harlem Heat and Bunkhouse Buck and Dirty Dick Slater.
Were they really hyping up the match, or were they hyping up the subplot?
No, they were hyping up the subplot more, which I guess kind of intertwines with the match. So, for context, basically, Colonel Rob Parker, who's managing the champions, and then you have Sister Sherry, who's managing Harlem Heat. They're having this little fling going on, and it's kind of plays into the finish where we'll talk about that. But basically, Bobby and Tony are talking about it, and then I noted this in my notes because Bobby's talking about how like they're gonna have kids, and then Tony Schiavone's like pissing himself laughing, like, like you could tell like Schiavone just like you could tell he's barely keeping himself together while trying to like kind of just be like transition to the next match. But I was like, okay, this interaction is pretty funny.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, I think the subplot really overshadowed the match itself there, but it was really great to see Harlem Heat, in the mix there on the pay per view. They one of the best tag teams of all time, and they were, they had been there for a couple of years, and they were finally, in the title hunt there, and it's a pretty good match.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, which I'm gonna break down here. So like right at so it's gonna be a little bit all over the place because
Oh, it was definitely all over the place. It was all over the place, all over the different rings, all over, and then they were all over each other's faces. And
so I basically said this is basically the only reason why I'm not gonna go into too much is that a lot of this match is a lot of strikes and holds. So it's kind of so I'm just gonna put it right there. Like if it's all over the place, it's because I'm not gonna because in my notes I'm not gonna waste space on my doc where it's like he puts
you got to get to the meat and potatoes of the lip lock.
Yeah. So right at the beginning, Booker T hits a clothesline to Slater at the start, which again, by the way, when you see Booker T here compared to Booker T later on and even now, very different. Like, I even felt like he was a bit more like buffed up here than he was beforehand, and he had like the short hair. They end up doing like a tag strike combo, which then Stevie Ray ends up hitting a body slam and an elbow drop, which then Buckhouse Buck and like ends up taking control. But then Stevie Ray comes in and hits a clothesline. Booker T hits like Buckhouse Buck with the Harlem sidekick. I call it the Harlem sidekick because that's what it is. Booker T hits Bunkhouse Buck with a hip toss and an elbow drop, which then, Stevie Ray and Dick Slater end up brawling, which leads to like Slater hitting like a swinging neck breaker. Then Stevie no-solds it, like chokes him. Booker T gets hit with an elbow to the back, which then he gets, he sells the back, and then which leads to Slater Buck taking control for a good bulk of the match. Slater ends up hitting a Russian leg sweeper or two, which then he ends up hitting a pile driver, which kind of looked a little awkward for what it was. Booker T gets hit with a big boot, but then Booker T gets out of a hold. He ends up missing a dropkick in the corner, which again looked really gnarly, and he ends up getting hit with a belly to back suplex for a 2. There is kind of an awkward like counter exchange here, which then leads to like a body slam and a neck breaker on Booker T. Stevie Ray ends up hitting like a bicycle kick to Slater, saving Booker T from a Boston Crab, which then Buck puts Booker T in the single leg crab, which then Booker T ends up hitting a scissor kick, not a finisher at the time, to kind of like give Stevie Ray the hot tag, which then he hits a bunch of slam strikes. And at one point he hits a clothesline. I think it was on one of them, but he didn't fall out of the ring. He ends up hitting a power slam, which then after that, the match begins to break down. Then on the other side of the ring while this is going on, Sister Sherry, and I put this in my notes too, and I this is verbatim, by the way. Rob Parker and Sister Sherry are getting it on in the other ring.
Yes, they were.
So while they're making out, the ref's distracted. Of course, the finish, of course, leads with the Nasty Boys hitting Dirty Dick Slater with his boot. So then Harlem Heat could then get the win and the tag team titles back. I don't remember how many times. I think they held it a couple times beforehand, but I'm going to check to make sure.
I think that all stemmed because they got involved with the Nasty Boys match and caused them to lose on the pre-show, from what I understand.
Yeah, but without context, though, it's very bizarre.
Yeah.
Let's see here. No, all right. So they won the belts for the 3rd time here on this show. So after the match, Harlem Heat are like, they're celebrating, but then they see this, and then they're like, whoa, what the hell?
Yeah, what are you doing, Sherry?
They're like, what the hell are you doing? And then Sherry's like, no. Like, I was doing psychological tactics. And then, Slater and Buck are pretty much pissed off at Robert Parker, and like they're saying, "Oh, you're in love with this woman. You cost us the match." And then Robert Parker's like, "Yeah, I'm in love with her. Just go to the back. I'll get you another match, and you get the belts back." And then Mean Gene's out here, and he's also trying to help interview, and he's like,
the whole time he's sweating profusely and trying to fan himself off of his hat.
And then, like, you hear Mean Gene go, "You're disgusting." And I'm like,
Yeah.
Jesus. I'm like, damn, Mean Gene. But that's why I love Mean Gene. He's pretty, like, he called it like it is. And then, like, he's, telling him, like, what the hell are you doing? And then he's like, yeah, he basically kind of just doubles down, says, I'm in love with him, or in love with her. So after this,
They should have had Savage approach Parker in the back after the match. Be like, "Don't do it, brother. Not with
Don't
Sherry.
do it. No, don't. I've done it before, man. It ain't worth it." Oh man, I will say for storyline reasons, I will say again, same problem as the first match. It was a tad too long. Like I feel like Booker T got decimated for a good bulk of the match, which I get that's what they were going for, but it dragged on and on and on, especially with all the strikes and holds. And yeah, the finish, like again, like I brought up earlier, without the context of, earlier on in the night, and you're just watching the show without watching main event, the Nasty Boys coming in were kind of random. Like it almost came off as like, wait, what? Okay.
Yeah.
I ended up giving this match a C+ for what it was, because it was competently done. It's just I wish, again, kind of like the first match, maybe shave off a few minutes to maybe make it a little bit more palatable. I believe it was after this match they started doing the advertising for a Halloween Havoc, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's correct.
Because this is where they're like, "Oh, Halloween Havoc coming to Detroit, Michigan," and of course, knowing in hindsight what happens to Halloween Havoc 95, which we're going to be talking about, it's
monster trucks.
Off the roof. The Yeti. God, I can't wait to talk about this show, Halloween Havoc, because of just how batshit insane the ending is. Because good, like, say what you will about WCW, and yes, a lot of their ideas were stupid, but I will give them this: at least try to experiment and see what would work. I'll give them that. So, now, sometimes you see the monster truck match and you go, I kind of wish they didn't do it, but I'll give them that. They at least experiment, even if it doesn't work out.
But I mean, was the ending to that any like more far-fetched than the Undertaker's casket match where he appeared on the video screen and then rose to the heavens?
Well, at least to be fair to that one, like Taker's kind of just dead, so I guess you could just make the argument that he just died again and then kind of came back. I mean, they're both stupid, but at least I can kind of defend that over, the giant falling off a roof and then magically being okay. Like, God. We'll talk. This is a Halloween Havoc. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. So after this, they have Mean Gene interviewing Arn Anderson before his match. They show off a promo package where they basically just document how like Arn Anderson and Ric Flair were friends, but then Ric Flair became batshit insane because Hulk Hogan showed up. So Arn Anderson hates him.
Well, they're more than friends. During the match, they said that they were kayfabe cousins. So
that is true.
I didn't know that. I didn't.
And basically, the promo is literally just Arn Anderson saying he's going to beat Ric Flair senseless, like to get it like back to his senses. Which, again, if you've seen the last two matches we've seen with Ric Flair, he's basically Ric Flair. So I don't understand what the problem was. But okay, sure, Arn. You know what, Arn? I'll trust your judgment. I don't want you to pull me out of my car and using the pow pow.
Is it you?
The pow pow, yes.
Yeah. So next we get the co-main event, the first of two main events. This is a match that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, or at least I would watch back.
I
Because,
forgot it. I forgot it actually happened.
like, yeah, it's very interesting, and like they even play up this match to be a big deal because you have various wrestlers like they're in the barricade like watching the match because it's a big deal, and plus being
Yeah.
in North Carolina, which is Horseman country, and being on a show with Wargames, which the Horsemen are associated with Wargames.
Yeah.
You kind of have that big match feel of Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, which, spoiler, this match was great.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You
Great
have
match.
you have two talented individuals, and Arn Anderson, who is very underrated, and then you have the greatest wrestler arguably of all time in Ric Flair. Of course, this match was going to be good. And plus they know each other for so long. It's again, this match you could argue is a very technical match, and it is, but it's very simple. They don't do like overly exaggerated moves. Like they're telling this story of like they both know each other so well almost
And
that
they
it's
they they build upon the match with and the outcome because you have the guys sitting in the audience, including one special person who will come into the mix here at the end of the match. But it was neat to see Eddie Guerrero and Alex Wright, who had just wrestled in the pre-show. They're sitting there, and Eddie's talking to Alex, to tell him what's going on and stuff because I guess he didn't know much English at the time. But you had Big Bubba out there, and they're just all focused on the match. But there's one guy that's going to come into play here in just a little bit.
Oh yes, they show off Flying Brian quite a bit, which I'll explain why. So I'm gonna break down this match. I'm gonna bring this up too. Lots of great technical wrestling throughout this match. So at the beginning they do a head like they're both like kind of filling each other up. Like Ric Flair is like doing like the Ric Flair stuff. Arn Anderson's doing Arn Anderson stuff. Like Rick
and I like to point something out. Where the problem was in the first match between John B. Bad and Flying Brian, where there was too many rest holds, this match had similar moves, but they were wear down holds, and they weren't boring. Like they were submission moves, and you were into the match when they were had them slapped on. They knew how to do the ring psychology a lot better in this match than the other. Of course, you had all the history going into it, but like I said, there's a difference between wear down holds and rest holds, and they pulled it off really well in this match.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rick does a shoulder block to Arn after he had him in a headlock, but then Arn then immediately dropped toe holds him, and he ends up ruffling his hair, and eventually an Arn then shoulder blocks Rick, and then he ends up slapping him, which I think Rick then takes the Flair bump where he falls on his he just falls forward. Then there's throughout this match, Arn goes after Rick's arm throughout, and then also Rick goes after Arn's leg throughout the match, which then he ends up slapping him when he first did it, and then Rick just responds with a woo, the woo, and then of course, which of course is a Ric Flair thing to do, of course. And also throughout this match, Ric Flair was really his chops to Arn Anderson. I don't know if it was just the selling or the fact that they the sound, they sounded really nice.
Well, I mean, it was a small arena and not a very big crowd at all. So, I mean, you were going to hear a lot of stuff that's going on in the ring.
Oh, absolutely. But it's still those Flair chops had some meat to them.
Oh, yeah.
So he's chopped him throughout, and he starts targeting the leg. Arn ends up going up top at one point, and then he stops Ric Flair with a finger poke and a sleeper hold before he ends up hitting a second rope knee to the back, which then gets the hammerlock body slam to sort of injure the arm. They trade strikes and chops out, and then Flair ends up getting Irish whipped and does the iconic Flair flip, which then he ends up using Arn's momentum and pulls the top rope down and ends up throwing him out of the ring. And then Ric Flair does something surprising after this. Ric Flair, I swear to God, this never worked. Ric Flair goes to the top rope, does a top rope axe handle to him on the outside. I'm like, there's no way this is happening here.
Yeah, that's a rare occurrence for Rick.
So after this, Rick, gets him back in the ring, does his knee drop, which then after this, Arn Anderson ends up Irish whipping Ric Flair into the corner, hits the backdrop, which then Rick, then they go to the floor, and then Rick, of course, because it's Ric Flair, has to get backdropped again on the floor, which then Arn gets suplexed. Rick then brings it back in the ring and does like this really nice standing suplex on Arn Anderson. Which then, they kind of trade some stuff, and then Arn ends up doing the sunset flip on Ric Flair, which then Rick ends up missing the punch. He punches the ground. Rick goes for the Flair flip in the corner again, but gets stuck into a tree of woe, which then, Arn's like stopping him out, and he chokes him out with his boot. Goes for the DDT, but Ric Flair ends up countering it, which then he ends up Flair flopping afterwards, because of course he does. Then Rick, of course, tries to go up to the second rope on the top rope for a second time, which if it, realistically, he shouldn't have chanced it because he gets thrown off again. So Arn ends up hitting his own knee drop, which then Ric Flair, this was a really nice counter where I believe Arn was going for something on the second rope, which then Rick counters it with a sucker punch and then locks in the figure four, which I thought that was a really nice transition, which then Arn gets out of it. And even when Rick was going to put it in, Arn's keeping his leg. He's trying to make sure he doesn't lock it in while he's got it almost locked in. That was really nice attention to detail, which goes to show how much they know each other at this point.
Yeah.
So Arn gets out of it, gets chop blocked, which then Rick goes for it again, which Arn counters with a small package. So a little bit more happens, which then Flying Brian surprisingly comes out from the crowd. Then he sucker punches Rick. Rick falls down. Then he sucker punches Brian, which then Brian goes down, which then Flying Brian comes in, kicks him in the back of the head, which then Arn Anderson hits the DDT for the 3. And just like that, Arn Anderson gets a massive win against Ric Flair in North Carolina, Horseman country. And we don't know what's going on with Brian.
I wish they didn't have the interference because it was such a great match. But
yeah,
of course, this sets up some things that's going to be happening in the coming weeks. And I guess the following pay-per-view, I think. But they I don't know. It was a lousy finish to what was one of the best matches I've seen in recent memory.
Oh, absolutely. It was a fantastic. It was amazing.
Match of the night easily.
Absolutely. But you it's when you have two guys like that in that caliber, and Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, you really can't expect anything less.
Oh yeah.
Good Lord. And I agree. Without the finish, I honestly, if we were doing star ratings, it would be a 5 out of 5. Right? Because it really didn't need to do much. To me, the where the setting is, what it represented, it was great. I gave this match an A- because because again, the interference finish would have kept it from the perfect A. But this was great. It's a very underrated match too. Not a lot of people talk about it, which I feel like they should do more because it's great.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't even remember they had a feud. So I can understand why people don't talk about it.
But I feel like more people should, because it was good.
Yep.
Very good. Oh, and also before we start talking about the main event, I kind of wanted to sort of address the whole Johnny Bad thing. So, Johnny Bad gets his tires slashed, so he doesn't make it to a U.S. title match. The following week, it's revealed that on Saturday night that DDP was the one that slashed his tires. So that would mean that Johnny Bad and DDP are going to wrestle for the TV title either at the next pay-per-view or whatever they face off. So
Okay, so Sting didn't have to face anybody.
Nope. And also, fun fact: Sting ends up dropping the title in Japan against. God, what was his name? I apologize to like all the hardcore wrestling fans that automatically know who I'm talking about, but I believe it was oh God, I again I apologize if I can't say his name. Sasaki.
Kitsuki Sasaki.
Kitsuki Sasaki. Okay. That makes sense.
Is that the guy that was formed a team with Hawk that time
Yes.
in All Japan? Okay. Yeah.
These are just copycat.
So that's just a little fun fact for people because like people are gonna ask like eventually later on where it's like we talk about the U.S. title matches and it's like, oh wait, wasn't Sting the champion? I just want to address that real quick. Like he drops the belt in Japan, so we're not going to cover that. And also Sasaki ends up dropping the belt to One Man Gang into like at Starrcade, but it was like in a dark match. So again, sorry to everybody who will be confused, but that's not my fault. That's WCW's fault. Yeah. So let's talk about the main event. All right. Even though I have a lot of notes, a lot of this match, I'll talk about it when we get to it. But so before the match, we get like this whole like promo from the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, and this was just like a weird promo where
Hogan.
It's like Hogan, we can't be safe. Like there's no room for the two of us type of promo. Like, okay, like, well, where are we going with this? And then it's like, oh, the Hulkamania is done. And then I'm like, yep, Hogan's definitely winning this match. So basically after this, we get like, I think it was, we either get we definitely don't get we get a promo package before the interview. So it's like, so the promo package, okay, fine. We get to this promo between the Hulkamaniacs, which again, when we talk about the match itself, so we got Hogan, Sting, Savage, and Luger. They're all in like face paint,
Let me tell you something.
Camo paint.
I wasn't looking forward to this main event at all, right? But that promo, man, that got me jazzed up, man. I'd seen them in the camo and stuff, and like I'm like, I need to look for these outfits on 2K22 because I didn't get 2K23. I'm still playing 2K22, so I might download them suckers later on because them shits look nice, and they were all they pumping everybody up. They're gonna go to war. Got the face paint on. It brought back memories of being a kid watching Hulk Hogan and Macho Man, and them. I liked it, man. It got me jazzed up.
It was an intense promo and a crazy promo because, like, knowing the guys involved, it makes sense. But damn, like, it did get me jazzed up a little bit. And
they slapping each other's chest. They going to war. We going to war. Badass.
And like Hulk Hogan brings up how they drank like Agent Orange, and I'm
that was not a flavor of Mountain Dew. No, he's talking about the real stuff right there.
So, like, Hogan's apparently so powerful that he could drink Agent Orange for several days. I'm impressed.
That's how he got that tan, man.
Very true, very true. So, after this promo, which is crazy. And by the way, like, while Hogan's, like, towards the end, like, everybody's, like, you have Sting who's walking across, like, Savage is, like, doing his crazy stuff. Luger's flexing. Like, it was crazy, but honestly, knowing who was involved, it was very, very cool. Which then we get to the main event, which is Wargames. And I have to say, the presentation of Wargames when they were bringing down the cage, like having all the pyro and fireworks, making it a big deal, and having Michael Buffer do the introductions was like, okay, this is cool.
But, it was cool, but the arena was too small, and that cage was so rinky-dink, and it which allowed for some hijinks later on when they got to pull the sides of it out, and they were reaching inside underneath the cage.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that because this was something that I noticed, but I just want to talk about this main event, and not necessarily the main event itself yet, but I want to talk about who's involved in this main event. So on one team, you have the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan. You have Macho Man Randy Savage.
Oh, yeah.
You have the WCW United States Heavyweight Champion Sting.
Ow!
the total package Lex Luger.
He ain't got no catchphrase.
And then on the other side, you have, and I shit you not, this was who they were facing, right? They were facing the Zodiac, aka the Butcher, aka the Booty Man,
aka the Disciple.
The Disciple, aka Brutus the Barber Beefcake, versus the Shark, aka, and no disrespect to any of these guys, but it's just, you have Shark, aka Earthquake,
aka Golga from the what was that group in WWE?
The Oddities, I think.
Yeah.
And then you have Kamala and Meng. Again, let me repeat myself. The main event of a pay-per-view consisted of Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Lex Luger, and Sting versus the Zodiac, the Shark, Meng, and Kamala.
Yeah.
That's the most bizarre sentence I've ever heard in my life. That I just ever uttered.
Yeah, but then but they're all like, they former WWF guys that Hogan knew and said, "Come on down here, brother. You'll get paid. We'll wrestle, brother. Come on." And he hooked them all up, and that's what you got there. You got the
it's
versus the Hulkamaniacs.
And again, like I said, no disrespect to everybody involved, but damn, like, again, I get the context. I understand it was during this whole Dungeon of Doom thing, but
I think you should go to sleep because you sound tired.
yeah. Okay. So, and yeah, like you said before, the steel cage, it's the cage they used it for. It was so small and very condensed. Like, it was very small. It was a very small cage surrounding two big rings. And yes, they did utilize it, which was cool with trapping people.
They had a ceiling on it. Of course, the old cages did have the ceiling on it, but they don't do that in WWE because they know, I think they quit using this. Did they always have the top on it? Because I know one time Sid was in one of those matches and he tried to do a choke slam or something, and he raised them up, and he hit the head of the dude he raised up on the top of the cage, and that kind of hurt the dude a little bit. I don't know if it was Flying Brian or what, but that was a previous match. But man, that was a really short like ceiling on that cage.
Yeah, and I honestly, watching this match as a whole, like, I think, and here's before I really break it down, I think if the novelty of Luger, Sting, Hogan, and Savage being on the same team would probably entice anybody to watch this match.
Yeah, and I think at least a few of those people might have been on cocaine.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, Savage was just all over the place.
Yeah, and I think that's the nicest way to say it. This match was really all over the place, and even before and again, I know I keep saying this, but before I really break this down, I like that, the Team Hulkamaniacs had like their own, like, even though they wore the same gear, they had stuff to it that made it theirs. So, like, Savage like had like the white like stuff like around his pants, like to show off like he still looked like Randy Savage. Like Sting just looked like Sting. Luger like had his own gear, and then like Hogan had like the yellow stuff. Like it, I really like the attention to detail here, and that's the one nice thing I'll say about it.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they haven't had a figure set of that team.
I'm surprised too. Like, because when you talk about like all-star teams, like it's an all-star team.
Yeah.
So to break down this match, and a lot of this match, I'm not even like. I'll just break it down and I'll explain why I'm breaking it down.
You got to mention the great spot with the Shark where he lands on the ropes.
Oh, yes, I actually have this in my notes, which I'm going to talk about. So Sting and Shark started out, which honestly, I was surprised they didn't start out with Meng, but honestly, Sting and Shark actually surprisingly had some pretty good chemistry here.
Yeah, that was great, and it was like I think the first time I've ever saw those two wrestle. Well, I mean, I probably saw it back when I was a kid or teenager, and I don't remember it. But being such a big fan of Earthquake and Surfer Sting all these years, coming back and watching that, and that being the first match I remember now of them two going at it. That was great, and I wish I would have saw them just going 1-on-1 at
Yeah,
some
like
point. But
after
that was
watching this, I wanted to actually watch a Sting and Shark match because that would have been, I think that would have been really interesting.
yeah.
So this is how Sting and Shark started out. Shark ends up coming out with aggressive start early on. He steps on Sting, which then Sting would do this really cool spot where he slingshot himself with a clothesline. He slingshot himself from the other ring, and he slingshots himself with a clothesline to the other ring, which that looked cool. Sting would slam Shark once, and then he tries to do it again, but he ends up collapsing due to Shark's weight. Shark tries to do the same thing, but as Sting, where he tries to kind of do the whole slingshot himself, but he ends up getting caught in the ropes, which then Sting would then kick him in the belly a couple times. Sting would look for a stinger splash, but he gets caught. However, he does crotch Shark on the top rope, so I guess that worked out. And then Sting locks Shark in the Scorpion Deathlock before Zodiac comes to the ring. Yes, no. And Sting ends up using the cage to kick him, which that looked cool. He ends up slamming him. He puts him in the Scorpion Deathlock for a second, but then Zodiac and Shark double team him, and this goes on for a while. Shark hits Sting with the leg drop, which I thought that looked pretty sick. So this is where, honestly, the match kind of falls apart once everyone comes in. Savage comes in next. He tries to suplex. Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, but you missed the part where Shark he tries to do a running leap over both ropes in the middle of the two rings, and he lands on top of the two ropes where he's draped over the two ropes in the middle of the two rings. And Sting, or did you mention that?
No, I mentioned it.
Oh, you did? Okay. I was zoning out there, but it was so cool. It was so dumb.
It did.
It was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. This is twice now, 2 episodes that we've talked about Shark and the dumbest spots I've ever seen, but this actually worked. Where a big fat guy, and he's draped over those two middle ropes, and Sting's just kicking him in the belly, and it was great. I got to get a clip of that and make a gif of it. It was just, especially the build-up where he's I'm going to start running. I'm going to jump over both of these ropes, and he doesn't make it. And I felt sorry for him. But it was wonderful. That was the highlight of the match.
It was a highlight.
There's another highlight coming up. I'll get to it in a little bit.
But like I said, this match falls apart really quick. Once Zodiac comes in, it's where the match kind of goes a little too all over the place for me. Savage comes in next, and
they're hanging from the walls on the outside, both teams.
Yeah. Which I thought that was kind of cool, but it was just all right. It kind of got old after the second time they did it. Savage comes in next. He tries to suplex Shark immediately for some reason. I'm like, okay, he's pretty crazy. He puts Zodiac in the Boston Crab, which then I think Shark stops him, which then Sting ends up hitting these 2 massive elbow drops on him, too, which I thought I was like, okay. Kamala comes in next. Kamala does nothing from my understanding.
He slaps his belly a little bit.
Yeah. So he comes in, Shark hits Savage with an atomic drop. Shark and Zodiac hanging Savage on the ropes, and they knee him. Then Luger comes in, he cleans house, which I thought that was another cool, I guess, moment. Which then Savage ends up hitting the only axe handle off the top rope in the match onto Shark, which then Luger tries to close on Zodiac, but he ends up hitting Savage, which causes this brief confrontation, which I thought that was kind of cool. The build up to keep that story going. And Meng came out last for the Dungeon of Doom, which again, it's cool to see Meng. He hits a super kick.
Yep.
And then of course, the guy who comes out last is Hulk Hogan. He then proceeds to throw powder in everyone's eyes. In Bobby Heenan's words, he's the biggest cheater in all of cheaters. So the rest of this match is basically just everyone punching people. It was it was punching, raking of the eyes.
It was a clusterfuck, and I think they were running low on time because Hogan wins the match with out of nowhere. I've never seen him do this. He pulls out a Steiner recliner on the Zodiac, and it's just what?
He puts he puts on the camel clutch, and I'm like, at first I'm like, and this is the first thought I thought of is like the Iron Sheik will not be pleased.
Well, I mean, it's not. Yeah, but it's more like a Steiner recliner because he wasn't really sitting down on him. He was just standing up. I don't think he. But man, that was just out of nowhere. I think he knew that they were running low on time and they had to get the match beyond or whatever. Well, that was the match beyond, but they needed the match beyond with Kevin Sullivan.
Yeah, so the match ends with the the camel clutch, and then Hogan gets five minutes of playtime with Sullivan. So he beats up Sullivan for a couple minutes.
Yeah, Sullivan looks like a midget compared to Hogan, and he's like they say he was 5'9". I don't think he was 5'9". He was shorter than that, and Hogan was like 6'7". But the other highlight of the match for me was Taskmaster. He like I said, he looks like a dwarf next to Hogan. He swings at Hogan. Hogan ducks the little man's punch. He ducks underneath the punch. It just looks so weird because he's so small and he's so tall and he ducks the punch. It's like when I was playing 2K22 and I had Omos versus Ray, and Omos did a duck underneath of one of a big boot attempt by Ray. He just ducked under his whole leg. Somebody that tall. It's just weird stuff.
So at the end of the match, Hogan hits the big boot on Kevin Sullivan, and then the Giant, who early on destroyed Hulk Hogan's prized, Harley Davidson that he was just gifted by the fans.
You don't mess with the hog. You don't mess with the man's hog.
No, you don't. And then the Giant comes in, like, he manhandles the referee, comes in. He's very agile this time, the Giant, a.k.a. Paul White, a.k.a. Big Show. But he comes in, he chokes Hogan out with both his hands. Like, Hogan punches Giant. Giant no-sells it. Then he chokes Hogan again, and then Kevin Sullivan says, "Finish it!" And then, then of course the Giant breaks Hulk Hogan's neck on pay-per-view.
That was, I don't know, that was a little bit extreme because I mean that's something you only saw in the movies. Like you snap a guy's neck, they're dead. He just killed Hulk Hogan in the middle of the ring. What the hell?
Yeah, and then of course the Hulkamaniacs come out, after Hulk Hogan's lying dead in the ring.
Of course he's immortal. He's immortal. He can have his neck snapped, but
oh yeah, sure. So that basically ends the show. Match wise, I gave it a C. I mean, other than a couple cool, this is where my thought process is on this. The match was really done to continue the story between Savage and Luger, but also to kind of build up the Giant and set up his program with Hulk Hogan. But everything else.
But of course, it was initially supposed to be Vader and Hogan, that storyline, and then Vader went AWOL. He went missing.
He went AWOL, which they bring up in the promo package. But I don't know. The main event was just kind of lackluster. Honestly, I think the main event would have been better if it was just a flat-out 8-man tag, and then have Hogan. I get it's Fall Brawl, and they need to do Wargames. Yeah.
What I didn't get about the match is, like I said, the ring was so the cage walls was so loose on it. They were pulling the guys out and getting up underneath it, and they had Savage halfway out underneath, and they were messing with Savage the whole time. And Sting's over in the corner, knocked out or whatever. And Luger and Hogan's on the outside. They didn't even bother to run around and try to stop the other team from hurting Savage. I didn't understand that because they're sitting there looking at him, and it's just weird spots during that whole thing.
Yeah, it was just a very blah main event, honestly. It was just a okay.
I don't even think it was booked. I just think they just went in there and just did it. They just did it on the spot. No, nothing.
I'll say this. I do think Sting and Shark tried at the beginning to kind of make it good. But I think once everybody came in, it just was a clusterfuck. And then by that point, you really couldn't contain it. And it's just one of those things where I understand knowing the people involved. I get they probably are not going to do massive spots and
Yeah, it's not going to be something like an NXT Wargames match.
No, but you kind of would expect like at least like a little, not necessarily more effort, but you could have maybe done a bit more. But
Yeah.
I digress. The show overall, you had a fantastic match with Arn and Rick. You had a good match with, Johnny B. Bad and Brian Pillman. A terrible match with Cobra and Pittman. A pretty good match. You had this show, I just feel like was all over the place, and
Yeah.
it wasn't a bad show. I will say that. It was entertaining to watch, but
Yeah, what pushed it over the edge as being good was I'm not Mr. Wonderful.
I'm not Mr. Wonderful. And then he takes his head in onto the mirror and he smashes it. I'm like, damn, calm down, Paul. It's fine. Yeah. So yeah, I would say Fall Brawl. Watching it wasn't a bad experience. You had a couple matches in here that were worth it, but at the same time, it was it just, I feel like the ending of the show was just kind of
Was it worth $34.95?
$34.95 was that the pay-per-view price at the time?
That's about what they were back then. Yeah. Might have been $29.95, but some of them, the WWF was pushing it there at $35 back then.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if I would say it was worth $30. If I bought it, I don't know if I'm trying to look at the time. I'd say maybe it would be worth it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's it does a lot to sort of it does a lot to build at least the next few stories, but I definitely don't know if I would say. I don't know if I would say it's worth. Would I say it's worth $30? Probably not.
Maybe to go see it live, not on pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But was it a bad show? No. It had really good moments, but it was just, even the really bad stuff wasn't the worst stuff I've ever seen. It was just,
no, it was some more. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Pittman. What? He's coming down from the ceiling. What?
But that, my friends, is WCW Fall Brawl 95 Wargames. Shifty, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
Nope. That was just a weird show, but looking forward to checking out some of these nitros coming up. How many nitros until the next pay-per-view?
All right, let me check, because Halloween Havoc is October 29th, 1995, and I'm going to look at my Peacock right now to see.
You're going to look at your Peacock right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see here. We have one. Hold up. That's not right, is it? It's saying there's 2 more episodes, but I don't think that's... Oh, wait. Hold up. No, it's October 29th. Excuse me. I'm wrong month. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more nitros before Halloween Havoc.
So we doing 3 and 3 before the pay-per-view?
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to do, because...
Okay.
Because the nitros are so short, we can at least afford to do at least 3 episodes before.
All right. That sounds good. So in 3 episodes' time, we'll be back on a pay-per-view.
Yes. So this is the first of 4 pay-per-views this season, but we will be back. I believe next week we'll be talking about the next 3 weeks of Nitro, building up the Halloween Havoc, and we're going to deal with the fallout of what the hell is going on with Flying Brian and what's associated with Arn Anderson. Is Hulk Hogan dead? And what kind of stuff are we going to see? That we'll answer next time. So I want to thank everybody in chat. Kavari and Deshaun was also here.
Hey.
I'm going to let Shifty talk. What's going on with you? What You got anything going on?
Not really. Not really. You can find me on Twitter. That's Shifty Gism. That's Shifty GISM at Twitter. And you can see me talk way too much about Star Wars and theories about Ahsoka and all that nerdy stuff. But, I advise against it.
Alrighty, good deal. Good deal. You guys can just find me on this channel typically, where I do I'm kind of going into more of a wrestling direction because I want to talk about stuff that I want to talk about. And wrestling is something that I've loved for most of my life. So being able to come on here and talk about it for an hour and a half, it's something that it's really cool, and I want to keep doing it. So
Yep.
I would really.
It's too bad that you don't have like a current event show because a lot of stuff happened today or within the last 2 days.
Yeah, it did, and I know people, and I just don't typically like to talk about the current news because it's kind of one of those things where it's not
always good. Not always good news. It's rarely good.
Yeah. It's not. It's I like talking about past stuff because it's something that I'm able. Because I haven't seen all this old stuff before, so being able to come back, as someone who's kind of more of a newer, not newer, but somebody who's started watching wrestling in 2010s, coming back to this stuff now, it's really interesting. And plus, being able to talk about with you, Shifty, who you were there, during that time.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to see where what's the word for it? It's a good contrast of styles. I guess that's the best term for it.
Where it came and where it is now and what led. Yeah. The past, present, and future.
The past, the present, the future. Then, now, forever, like the WWE rhetoric. God. But with that being said, though, guys, we are going to wrap it up. Shifty, thanks for coming on. I always appreciate it, and I can't wait for next week.
Yep, thanks for inviting me. It was fun.
Absolutely, man. It's always a pleasure. And with that being said, thank you guys for watching. This is the Osinator signing out.
Later.
Peace.
That's awesome.